What if I told you that one of Charleston's most respected preachers vanished into thin air, inside a locked room, leaving behind only a bloodstained Bible and a note that said, "The congregation demands its sacrifice. The covenant must be honored." Sounds like a horror movie, right? But this isn't fiction. This really happened, and the powerful people who covered it up might still have descendants walking Charleston's streets today. Before we dive into this chilling tale of secrets, power, and betrayal in the American South, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. This story might hit closer to home than you think. Clapperboard Part 1: The disappearance of Reverend Thornfield. On a boiling hot August night in 1856, something unexplainable happened in Charleston, South Carolina. Reverend Elias Thornfield, one of the most respected voices in the city, vanished from his private study in side street Bartholomew's Church. The room was locked from the inside. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, only three things were found: his blood-stained Bible, a handwritten note, and an open window facing the church graveyard. The note said, "The congregation demands its sacrifice. The covenant must be honored." That was it. Within hours, church leaders shut down any investigation. The official story: the Reverend must have suffered a breakdown and fled. But that was a lie. The real story was locked away in sealed church archives for over 160 years, until a set of private letters were discovered during a renovation of the old church library. Letters that hint at something darker. Much darker. They reveal a conspiracy involving Charleston's richest families, names that still carry weight today: the Pinckneys, the Ravenels, the Rutledges. These families weren't just rich, they controlled politics, trade, and the very laws of South Carolina. They also built St. Bartholomew's with their own money, carving their names into the foundation stone like royalty. And behind the polished pews, the fancy clothes, and the choir hymns, something rotten was happening. St. Bartholomew's wasn't just a church, it was a place where secrets were traded like currency. A confessional for the powerful. A vault for sins that could destroy empires. And no one knew those secrets better than Rev. Thornfield. He wasn't from Charleston. He came from Richmond, Virginia, with glowing letters of recommendation and a reputation as a brilliant preacher. Tall, silver-haired, and sharp as a whip, he spoke with a voice that made even hardened slave owners feel like God was watching them personally. Within months of his arrival, the city's elite were lining up just to talk to him. But it wasn't always about faith. Many came to confess what they couldn't admit to anyone else. That's what made him dangerous. One of his closest visitors was Dr. Edmund Rutledge, a wealthy physician from a founding family, who ran not just a clinic, but secret businesses that served the dark desires of Charleston's upper crust. His wife, Margaret, had no idea. She lived in luxury, completely unaware of the double life her husband, and their preacher, were a part of. And then Thornfield disappeared. The families scrambled to cover it up. Witnesses died, evidence vanished, and the note, the chilling message about a congregational sacrifice, was quietly locked away. But now, that note is back. And so is the truth. Studio Microphone Part 2: The night the church turned cold. By the end of that hot August night in 1856, Reverend Thornfield would be gone. And three of Charleston's most powerful men would carry a secret so dark, it would follow their families for generations. What happened behind that locked church door is something the city never dared speak about, until now. In Charleston, Judge Hamilton Crenshaw was known as a man of justice. His rulings shaped entire families' futures. But few knew the truth. The judge was drowning in gambling debts, terrified that one day the newspapers would expose him and destroy everything he'd built. Every week, without fail, he visited Reverend Thornfield, not for confession, but for something deeper. Something darker. He wasn't the only one. Senator Robert Barnwell, one of the most powerful men in Washington, had also become a regular visitor to St. Bartholomew's. He always came at night. Always alone, and always left looking haunted. Behind his polished image as a Southern gentleman, Barnwell had secrets that could crush his career, and maybe even bring down others in Washington. The summer of 1856 had pushed Charleston to the edge. Yellow fever was spreading fast. Slavery debates were tearing the country apart. The air itself felt poisoned. People whispered about omens. Families fled the city. Even Market Street, usually alive with noise and trade, had gone quiet. On August 23, the temperature hit 98 degrees by noon. Even the iron balconies burned to the touch. That morning, Reverend Thornfield was in his study, taking meetings and writing notes for his evening sermon. But something was off. Sarah Beaumont, the church secretary, had worked at St. Bartholomew's for 15 years. She knew the Reverend's routines. She also knew when something was wrong. That day, he kept glancing at a gold pocket watch, a gift from a mystery donor the previous Christmas. The watch had a Latin inscription Sarah could never read. Thornfield often held it when he was deep in thought. But today, he clutched it like it was the only thing holding him together. Throughout the day, powerful visitors came in and out of the church, merchants, judges, politicians. They asked for private audiences, and left looking pale, shaken, and afraid. One man, Cornelius Fitzhugh, a wealthy tobacco trader, came out of Thornfield's study visibly trembling. His hands shook so badly, he couldn't even light his cigar. By sunset, the churchyard was casting long shadows over the tombs of Charleston's founding families. That's when Thornfield told Sarah to leave early. I have important matters to attend to this evening, he said. Do not disturb me under any circumstances. Lock the doors and tell anyone who asks that the church is closed. There was something in his voice, something cold and final, that gave her chills, despite the heat. As she was filing the last of the day's letters, Sarah noticed 3 men arriving, Drive. Rutledge, Judge Crenshaw, and Cornelius Fitzhugh. She knew them well. They were vestry leaders, men of status, men who didn't scare easily. But tonight, they looked scared. Rutledge kept checking behind him. Crenshaw clutched a leather satchel like it held his life. Fitzhugh was whispering what sounded like prayers. They didn't say a word to Sarah. They just entered Thornfield's study and shut the door. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, almost choking. Then the arguing started. Sarah could hear raised voices through the thick wooden door. At one point, Drive. Rutledge shouted. You cannot ask this of us, Elias. Not after everything we've built. Thornfield's reply was ice cold. The covenant demands completion. Your souls are already forfeit. Then came Crenshaw's voice, filled with desperation. There must be another way. God wouldn't demand this. And Thornfield's laughter, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a church, sent Sarah running down the hall. Later that night, around 9:15, the door finally opened. The 3 men emerged looking like they had aged 10 years in an hour. Crenshaw couldn't even light his pipe. Fitzhugh kept crossing himself like something evil had touched him. And Rutledge, sweating and disheveled, came over to Sarah with a forced calm. Rev. Thornfield is working on matters of spiritual importance, he said. No one is to disturb him. Please go home. She obeyed, but something deep inside told her this night was far from over. She waited 30 more minutes. Then she went back to the study, trembling. The door was still locked, but she could hear movement inside, pages turning, a pen scratching across paper. But the words being spoken weren't English. Not even Latin. They sounded wrong, like they didn't belong in this world. She thought she heard other voices too, low and distant. But Thornfield was alone. The air around the door had turned cold, like all warmth had been sucked from the room. Sarah backed away, shaking, and fled the church. The next morning, everything changed. When Sarah returned to prepare for service, Thornfield's study was still locked, and completely silent. She called Marcus Webb, the church sexton, a man who had held every key to that church for 40 years. When they opened the door, Thornfield was gone. No body, no blood, just an open window, a Bible soaked in something dark, and a chill in the air that never quite left that room. Sarah and Marcus never spoke of what they saw, but neither of them were ever the same again. Studio Microphone Part 3 Blood, Secrets, and the Hidden 13. When Reverend Elias Thornfield vanished in 1856, he didn't just disappear, he was erased. But what was left behind in his locked study told a story far more terrifying than any sermon he ever preached. What investigators found would shake Charleston to its core, if the truth had ever been allowed to surface. The study door had been locked from the inside. The windows were sealed shut with thick wooden bars. There was no way in or out. And yet, Reverend Thornfield was gone. No one had seen him leave. There were no signs of a struggle. Just a quiet, cold room, and the remains of something no one could explain. On his desk sat his open Bible, stained with fresh blood that hadn't dried, even after an entire night. The blood wasn't spilled randomly. It traced across specific verses, circling words like sacrifice, covenant, and eternal price. Next to the Bible was a note. It was written in Thornfield's handwriting, but not in ink. It was written in that same deep red blood. Greater than, the congregation demands its sacrifice. The covenant must be honored. The 13 have become 12. But the work continues. E.t. The room looked like a ritual had taken place. Drawers from his desk had been neatly emptied, not dumped like during a robbery, but organized with eerie care, letters sorted by date, financial records stacked in clean rows. And in a perfect circle around the desk chair lay a set of sealed envelopes, each one labeled with the name of one of Charleston's wealthiest families. Where Thornfield's chair should have been, there was a dark bloodstain on the rug. A perfect circle, too much blood for anyone to survive. Behind the desk, Sarah Beaumont and Marcus Webb found something even more disturbing: ceremonial objects. A silver chalice from the church altar. A dagger with strange carvings on the handle. The blade still wet with something dark. The dagger wasn't from the church. No one had seen it before. But it looked ancient, almost sacred, and evil. Briefcase. The investigation. What followed wasn't really an investigation, it was a cover-up. Judge Crenshaw declared the matter sensitive, and took full control. Dr. Rutledge, a close friend of Thornfield's, appointed himself the medical examiner, even though there was no body to examine. The official explanation: a mental breakdown brought on by the heat and stress. The blood, just a nosebleed. The disappearance, a family emergency in Virginia. The local papers told an even simpler story. Greater than, Reverend Thornfield has left town to be with his sick mother in Richmond. He will return soon. But those closest to the truth knew better. Marcus Webb, the church's caretaker, told his wife that what he saw in that room still haunted his dreams. Dr. Rutledge aged almost overnight, his thick black hair turning gray within days. Judge Crenshaw began drinking heavily and was often seen stumbling drunk on East Bay Street, muttering about prices paid, and honoring the covenant. And Sarah Beaumont, the loyal church secretary for 15 years. She was forced out. After a short leave, she returned to find her job filled by a stranger, a young woman from Columbia who had been told never to ask about Thornfield or mention the former secretary again. Man running the quiet exodus. Within weeks, the 3 men who had met with Thornfield that final night all left Charleston. Dr. Rutledge moved back to Richmond, selling everything, including his medical practice, at a loss. Judge Crenshaw abruptly retired and vanished to a plantation in Georgia. Cornelius Fitzhugh, the tobacco magnate, sold his empire for pennies and vanished without a trace. Rumors said he ran to California. Or maybe even South America. Charleston was left in shock and silence. Candle a haunting legacy. Things only got weirder. The new preacher, a nervous young man named Jonathan Pierce, reported that something was wrong with the church. He said he felt watched during sermons. Thornfield's old study, sometimes so cold frost formed on the windows, even in summer. Church members started reporting strange things too. Cold spots moving through the sanctuary. Whispers coming from empty pews. A breath on the back of the neck during prayer, even when no one was behind them. And then there was the money. Each month, an envelope appeared in the offering box, cash, the exact amount of Thornfield's old salary. No return address, no name, but the handwriting on the note. It looked just like his. Old key 33 years later, the hidden vault. For decades, the story faded into ghost tales, until 1889. That winter, during renovations on the Rutledge family mansion, workers broke into a false wall in what had once been Drive Rutledge's private study. Inside the hidden chamber was a collection of documents that had been sealed in oilcloth, carefully hidden for over 30 years. The contents: letters, photos, financial records, and what they revealed would have destroyed half of Charleston's elite. Scroll Thornfield's true purpose. Thornfield wasn't just a preacher. He was a master manipulator. A blackmailer. A man who gathered secrets like weapons. His letters revealed he had been blackmailing judges, doctors, and senators for years. And it wasn't just about money or power. There was something darker. One letter, dated just days before he vanished, was sent to Dr. Rutledge. It read, "Greater than, my dear Edmund. Your resistance puts everyone in danger. The photograph I have of you at the Magnolia Street Club would destroy you and your wife. I also have documentation of your role in the opium shipments. Senator Barnwell has agreed to our terms. Judge Crenshaw understands what happens if he doesn't cooperate. The Lord's work requires sacrifice. The covenant demands completion. Your soul, and theirs, hangs in the balance. E.t. So what was the covenant? Whatever it was, it went far beyond blackmail. It bound men in blood, secrets, and something far more ancient than Southern politics. Round pushpin next up in part 4. What did the 13 really stand for? And how did Thornfield tie them together in a ritual older than Charleston itself? Speech balloon. Comment your theories below, hit that subscribe button, and share this with a friend who loves a good mystery, because what's coming next gets even darker. Part 4. The Conclave Beneath Street. Bartholomew's, Charleston, South Carolina, winter 1889. The renovation of the Rutledge mansion had been paused for weeks. The discovery of Thornfield's blackmail archive had sent whispers across Charleston like smoke from a burning house, light enough to dissipate quickly, but toxic to those who breathed it in. For the families named in the documents, silence was again the favored defense. The papers were quietly acquired by a consortium of surviving heirs, many of whom paid exorbitantly to have them destroyed. But one page was missing. Sarah Beaumont had it. She had returned to Charleston under a false name, decades older and with nothing to lose. The moment she'd heard of the renovation at South Battery, she knew something buried would rise. When a former apprentice of her late husband, who had become a contractor, reached out to her in secret, whispering of documents and blood-stained seals, she knew her suspicions had been correct. The page she now possessed bore neither letterhead nor signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Elias Thornfield's. The ink, as before, had a dried reddish tint, and the content was no less disturbing. Greater than, the seal must never be broken, lest the dead walk again. The 12th must hold the line, and the 13th must never rise. The circle is closed, the blood paid, and the price binds us. But I hear them in the walls now. They remember. Sarah had read those lines 100 times and still woke with nightmares. The mention of the 13th chilled her more than anything else. Thornfield's last note, left on his desk in 1856, had spoken of the 13 become 12. But if Thornfield had disappeared, and his blood stained the carpet, was he the 13th? Or the one sacrificed to prevent the 13th from rising? In the weeks that followed the Rutledge discovery, the Foundation crew working beneath St. Bartholomew's Church began reporting strange problems. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Tools vanished and reappeared in bizarre locations, often placed in perfect circles. The ground beneath the foundation proved unusually unstable, riddled with old brickwork and sealed passageways no modern map recorded. One evening, after the workers had gone, Sarah returned to the church. She still kept a spare key to the vestry, though officially she had no reason to be there. The church was empty, or should have been. But the moment she stepped inside, she knew someone, or something, was watching. The chapel was bathed in moonlight filtered through stained glass. A low draft stirred the candle stubs still resting in their brass holders. Sarah moved slowly toward Thornfield's former study, now used as storage. The temperature dropped sharply the moment she touched the doorknob. Inside, the room was just as she remembered, frozen in time. Reverend Pierce had reportedly sealed it years ago after a breakdown, claiming the shadows moved too much. No one questioned his resignation when he left for Wilmington the following spring. Sarah stepped in, the smell of old paper and dry rot thick in her nostrils. She knelt before the section of floor where the circle of blood had been. Though scrubbed clean and repainted, she could still feel the impression beneath her fingertips. She tapped softly, hollow. Pulling a small crowbar from her satchel, she pried at the floorboard. It lifted too easily. Beneath it was a small space, just deep enough to conceal a book. Wrapped in rotted cloth and tied with a leather cord, it looked like a journal. The cover bore no title, only a symbol burned into the hide, a circle of 13 dots with one smeared through the center. Sarah opened it. The pages were brittle but legible. Dates spanned from 1842 to 1856, beginning with seemingly normal entries, pastoral notes, congregation records, spiritual reflections. But gradually, the tone shifted. By 1854, Thornfield was no longer writing about God's grace but about sacrifice, obedience, and the Old Covenant. He referred often to the Conclave, a secret fraternity within Charleston's elite, bound not only by shared vice but by an ancient rite that promised protection, power, and unnatural longevity. A passage from April 1855 chilled Sarah's marrow. Greater than, the spirits require alignment. Each member must provide a name, a life, innocent blood, willingly given or violently taken. Only then will the gates remain closed. Only then will the 13th remain asleep. Another entry from July 1856. Greater than, Fitzhugh protests the boy's offering. Claims his wife suspects. Crenshaw agrees but warns that disobedience means rupture. Rutledge has begun to see things in his sleep, children with no faces. They whisper from the corners. The circle is thinning. 3 nights later, construction beneath Street Bartholomew's halted permanently. During excavation of an old tunnel, a wall collapsed, revealing a crypt hidden for over a century. Within it, 13 niches were carved into the stone. 12 were empty. The 13th held a coffin, smaller than normal, child-sized. Authorities sealed the chamber almost immediately. The church labeled it an unregistered colonial burial site, and historians were quickly dispatched from Columbia to catalog the find. But the lead historian, Abigail Mercer, filed only one report before vanishing. Her final recorded words, left in a hastily scrawled note in her hotel room, were greater than, the coffin was never meant to be opened. But the seal is broken. The blood was never enough. The 13th is not what we thought. Back in her Charleston apartment, Sarah Beaumont stared into a mirror, heart pounding. Since touching Thornfield's journal, she'd begun hearing faint whispers at night. She dismissed them at first as trauma rekindled. But tonight, she saw something behind her. No reflection, just absence, a human-shaped void in the candlelight. She did not turn. Instead, she whispered into the dark. Elias, was it you they sacrificed, or were you the one doing the sacrificing? No answer. Only the soft creak of floorboards and a gust of air that extinguished the candle. Then, a voice, low, ragged, barely more than a breath. Greater than, the covenant was never broken, only delayed. Sarah turned. The mirror was empty. So was the room, except for the circle of 13 dots drawn in ash on the floor. Part 5. The 13th Door. Charleston, South Carolina, February 1890. By the time the early February frost melted from the narrow streets of Charleston, the city had quietly begun to decay in ways only the oldest families could recognize. The paint flaked faster from the facades of mansions along Meeting Street. Dogs howled at empty corners. Infants cried at odd hours, and their mothers swore they saw something move just beyond the crib, always gone when the lantern was lit. Sarah Beaumont no longer slept. She sat most nights with Thornfield's journal open in her lap, the pages spreading like a disease across her writing desk. The more she read, the more connections emerged. The Old Covenant wasn't just a dark pact among a few wealthy men, it was older than Charleston itself. Buried references to something called the 13th Door appeared in colonial letters, plantation logs, and early church documents. The phrasing was always the same. Greater than, 13 sealed it. 12 guard it. 1 shall open. But the journal held something worse, a list of names. All 13, the founding members of the conclave. She recognized them: Rutledge, Crenshaw, Fitzhugh, Dawes, Thornfield, everyone a Charleston patriarch. Everyone with a chapel pew, a park bench, or a street still bearing his name. The final name had been scratched out. Not just crossed, but clawed away with what looked like a blade or nail, leaving a tear in the parchment. Beneath it was written in faint red ink: "He still dreams in the hollow place." Sarah took that as direction. The hollow place was not easy to find. Charleston's understructure was a labyrinth. Abandoned cisterns, smuggler tunnels, and collapsed root cellars riddled the city like veins under pale skin. But one lead held promise: a sealed basement beneath the original Charleston Orphan Asylum, now the city archives. It took Sarah 3 weeks and 2 bribes to access the lower level. The warden called her foolish and left her alone with only an oil lamp and a rusted ring of keys. The door was deep, behind a storage wall of rotted crates and broken shelves. And just as the journal described, it bore no knob, only a black iron plate etched with 13 circles. 12 had faded to gray. The 13th remained red, as if freshly marked. Sarah pressed her hand to the final circle. The metal warmed under her palm, and she felt something click behind the wall. The door swung inward. The passage beyond smelled like ancient earth and burnt wax. The walls were lined with crude drawings, symbols matching those in Thornfield's journal. Circles within circles. A serpent eating its tail. A child with its mouth sewn shut. She followed the tunnel down a spiral of brick steps until the air grew colder, denser, like it was resisting her breath. At the bottom was a room. Circular, with no ceiling, just shadows spiraling upward into a dome of darkness. 13 stone chairs encircled a fire pit now filled with ash. Each chair bore a carved name. 12 were worn with age. The 13th was new. It read simply, "Returned." Sarah knelt beside it and saw something protruding from the ash. A bone-white hand, child-sized, reaching up, not buried, but waiting. Suddenly, her lamp sputtered. Then extinguished. The room fell into absolute silence. And then came a voice. High, echoing, neither child nor man. Greater than, you broke the seal, Sarah. She spun, heart thundering. Greater than, you brought me back. From the black dome above, something descended, not falling, but unfolding from the darkness itself. A figure, pale as death and wrapped in robes of stitched linen, each embroidered with 13 circles. Its face was wrong, eyes too wide, lips too small. And when it smiled, its teeth were not human. Sarah backed against the wall. Who are you? She whispered. The figure tilted its head. Greater than, I was the 13th. I was never meant to be named. Never meant to be mourned. It raised its hand, and a ripple of heat swept the chamber, igniting the ash into sudden flame. The stone chairs cracked and split as a wind whipped through the room. Sarah held the journal like a shield. You were sacrificed, she said, half believing it. They killed you to seal the door. The figure laughed, soft and cold. Greater than, they thought they could contain what they never understood. They offered blood to lock me in. But blood calls to blood. It pointed at her. Greater than, you are of their line. Their legacy. And now you carry the key. Sarah's chest burned. She looked down and saw the 13-dot symbol bleeding through her blouse, branded into her skin. No, she murmured. The figure stepped closer. Its eyes burned with ember light now, flickering like candle flames. Greater than, Charleston was the first circle. You are the next. Then it vanished, dissolving into cinders, swept away by a final gust of wind that extinguished the fire and dropped the chamber into darkness again. When Sarah emerged the next morning, she was covered in ash and could barely speak. The church bells tolled overhead, but no one noticed her as she staggered through the streets. She checked into a boarding house under her old name, Miss Eliza Carr. That night, she made one final entry in Thornfield's journal. Greater than, I have seen the 13th door. I have spoken to what lies beyond. The others were right to seal it. But they did not kill him. They fed him, generation after generation. The old covenant was never about protection. It was about hunger. Greater than, he is awake now. He wears no name, but he walks among us. Greater than, he's already chosen the next 12. The final scene plays out days later, as a new rector takes position at St. Bartholomew's. During renovation of the East Wing, a hidden chamber is discovered behind a crumbling wall. Within it, 12 empty chairs. And one journal, open to the final page. A 13th name is now visible, written in blood. Sarah Beaumont, Part 6. The New 12. Charleston, South Carolina, March 1890. The letter arrived by courier at midnight. Heavy parchment sealed in black wax, bearing the sigil of the serpent devouring itself, its ink still wet. Inside, written in the same red script that haunted her dreams, were the names of 11 strangers and one signature she could no longer deny. Sarah Beaumont. The list read like a prophecy. Bankers, priests, teachers, and magistrates. A mix of the powerful and the hidden. None connected by blood, but all bound now by a pattern older than any family tree. Each one lived in Charleston. Each one had, at some point, crossed paths with her in the last month. Sarah sat at the edge of her rented cot, the letter trembling in her hands, the 13th circle still pulsing like an ember across her chest. It was no longer a symbol, it was a living mark. Some mornings it wept blood. Other mornings it whispered to her. Tonight, it did both. The next morning, Sarah began visiting the names on the list. She told herself it was to warn them. But deep down, she knew better. The 13th had chosen her not as a prophet, but as a harbinger. The first name was Reverend Elias Blackstone, a widowed preacher at St. Jude's Chapel. Reverend Blackstone had spent the last 10 years tending the poor and the damned. His sermons were soft, filled with light. But behind his kindness, Sarah saw it now, the dull flicker of something awakened. He didn't resist. When she showed him the letter, he took it with steady hands and folded it into the pages of his Bible. I've heard the hymn, he said. Late at night, when no one else is breathing. A voice humming behind the walls. He closed the Bible. I think I was always waiting for this. The second was Martha Liddell, a retired schoolteacher who lived in the French Quarter. Sarah found her feeding crows from the balcony of her crumbling townhouse. They started coming after I turned 70, Martha said, without turning. Every day at the same hour. They line up along the railing like sentries. She tossed another handful of seeds. They know something's coming, don't you? When Sarah handed her the list, Martha smiled. I was hoping I'd be on it. Sarah spent 10 days finding the rest. Some welcomed her like an old friend. Some screamed and slammed doors, only to show up at her boarding house the next night, feverish and wide-eyed, asking what came next. They were already dreaming of the circle. Of the 13th door. Of a voice that spoke from shadows and candlelight. Each night, she marked their names in the journal. Each morning, her reflection looked less like her own. On the 12th night, Sarah stood at the edge of the harbor where the water met the old stone pier. All 11 had accepted. All had begun their own transformations, small things at first. A stranger in the mirror. Words they didn't remember speaking. A hunger for firelight. Only one task remained, the gathering. She opened the journal to its final blank page and began to draw. A circle, 13 marks, and in the center, a door with no keyhole, only a child's handprint etched in bone. The ritual took place beneath the ruins of the old Charleston asylum. Sarah led them there at dusk, each carrying an offering: feathers, wax, a strand of hair, a bone from a dead bird, a prayer written backward. The 13th had no need for gold or blood. It hungered for the things people forgot to fear. They formed the circle in silence. No incantations, no fire, just presence. Then, the door appeared, not physically, but through sensation. A sudden pressure in the chest. A ringing in the ears. A taste of soil and smoke. Sarah stepped forward. The mark on her chest flared white-hot. The door opened. There are no words for what came through. Not a creature, not a god, an absence that walked like a man. He moved through the circle slowly, touching each of the 12 in turn. And with each touch, something was taken, a piece of memory, a color from the eye, a sound only they could hear. When he reached Sarah, he paused. You have done well, he whispered, in a voice that sounded like every voice she had ever trusted. But the city still remembers. It must forget. He raised his hand to her forehead. And the light went out. When Sarah awoke, it was morning. She stood alone on the steps of St. Jude's Chapel. Her hands were clean, her skin unmarked. The journal was gone. The 12 were scattered across the city, each returned to their lives. But Charleston had changed. No one spoke of the old chapel anymore. The records of the orphan asylum vanished from the city's archive. Street names shifted slightly. People who once remembered the Thornfield family now swore they had never existed. Something was rewriting the past, subtly but surely. The city was forgetting, exactly as the 13th had ordered. That night, Sarah received another letter. Smaller. No wax. Just a single slip of paper. Greater than, circle complete. Await instruction. Phase 2 begins. Epilogue. The burned map. Private residence, Boston, April 1890. A man in a tweed coat sipped his tea while staring at a half-burned map of Charleston pinned to his study wall. Red ink circled 13 locations across the city, each one matching an old Masonic diagram known only to a secret order of scholars who'd studied the 13th phenomenon since the Salem trials. The man placed a pin on the map. Then another. Then paused at the last. He pulled out a photograph of Sarah Beaumont, her face half faded, her eyes too bright. She's the axis, he murmured. Behind him, a grandfather clock struck 13. To be continued. Part 7 will follow the rise of the Forgetters, a secret order sent to stop the spread of the 13th. Sarah will face the cost of her awakening, and the 12 will begin to turn. Would you like Part 7 next? Part 7: The Forgetters. Boston, Massachusetts, May 1890. The man in the tweed coat was not a professor, though he lectured. He was not a priest, though he carried a book older than the Gospels. He was not a soldier, though he had once marched through burning cities, whispering counter-songs as fire danced behind his eyes. His name was Jonathan Bell, and he belonged to an order that officially did not exist. The Forgetters. An ancient line of scholars and sleepers, bound by silence, who tracked anomalies in memory, disruptions in collective truth, and things that fed on what was forgotten. And Charleston had gone dark. Not in the physical sense. Its streets bustled, its papers printed, its people breathed. But the city had lost something. A fracture in the known. Names once engraved in ledgers now yielded blank spaces. Buildings photographed last winter now stood as vacant lots, overgrown with ivy. Children remembered lullabies their mothers swore they'd never sung. Jonathan had seen this before. And always, at the center, the 13th door. Charleston, 3 weeks earlier. Sarah Beaumont sat at her window and watched the moon flicker like a candle nearing its end. Every night since the gathering, she had felt the city's rhythm slip further from the natural. Time was unraveling here, slowly, softly, like lace coming undone. Birds no longer sang at dawn. Mirrors no longer held reflections the same way twice. And the 12, they were changing. Reverend Blackstone no longer blinked. He stood in the pulpit unmoving, speaking in cadences that hypnotized his congregation. A boy had walked into the church last week and hadn't come out. No one remembered him. Martha Liddell's crows had started spelling words in the sky. Latin phrases Sarah hadn't known she knew. When she knocked on Martha's door, the windows wept. One of the 12 had vanished entirely. His house was boarded up. The neighbors couldn't recall his name. But Sarah remembered. Thomas Wexler, the baker with the stammer. He had touched the 13th first. And now he was gone. Sarah felt it every day now. Phase 2 was already unfolding. And she no longer knew if she was its messenger, or its weapon. Boston, same week. Jonathan Bell reviewed the last of the field reports. 11 anomalies. 1 confirmed disappearance. A burned asylum with no recorded fire. Parish registers overwritten by blank ink. And then, the name. Sarah Beaumont, not a native of Charleston. Not in any census. And yet, her name appeared on a single surviving photograph, taken on the night of the Thornfield orphanage's closing in 1872. She would have been a child. And yet the face in the photo looked unchanged. She is the anchor, Jonathan whispered. He slid a copper key from a pouch sewn into his coat. Then he opened the cabinet. Inside was a wooden box lined with hair. Human hair, braided into sigils. He pulled out a needle. The old ways still worked. He would go to Charleston not as a hunter, but as a reminder, to stitch memory back together. To break the spell, to close the 13th door. Charleston, midnight. Sarah dreamed of mirrors, 13 of them, each one reflecting a version of herself. The nun, the child, the orphan, the mother she'd never been, the corpse she might become. In the center, a blank mirror. No reflection, just a surface of swirling gray. She stepped toward it, heart pounding. And from within, something reached out. She awoke screaming. There was blood on the windowpane. But it wasn't hers. Below, the cobbled street was silent, except for the figure in the long gray coat, placing tiny brass charms along the walkway. Sarah narrowed her eyes. This one wasn't local. She felt the burn of the 13th mark beneath her collarbone. It throbbed. Someone had entered the city who did not belong to the pattern. The first meeting. Jonathan found her in the marketplace the next morning. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, gloves too fine for the weather, and a ring of black thread on her left finger. A marker. A warning. He approached gently. You're walking in circles, he said. Sarah blinked. Excuse me. He pointed at the stone beneath her feet. A forgotten merchant's seal. A perfect spiral carved in granite. Most people who stand on that spot lose time, he added. Sarah tilted her head. And you haven't. I'm not most people. They stared at each other. You've seen the door, he said. I've opened it. Silence. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. So, which order sent you? Bellkeepers. Or the dust watchers? Jonathan's voice was low. Neither. I'm a forgetter. Something in her face flinched. She had heard that word before. Maybe in the dreams. Maybe from the 13th itself. Jonathan stepped closer. You've invited something into this world that doesn't feed on blood or belief. It feeds on absence. On decay. It's not just erasing people. It's rewriting what could have been. Sarah's voice shook. Then why'd I still remember? Because you're the anchor. Jonathan pulled a silver pendant from his coat. Inside, a miniature clock face with no hands. Anchors hold the gate open, he said. Or close it. Meanwhile, across the city, the 12 began to twitch. They had felt Jonathan's presence the moment he arrived. The 13th didn't need to speak. It hummed now, a deep vibration beneath their bones. A warning, an instruction. He must forget. Reverend Blackstone's sermon ended early. He locked the chapel doors. Martha's crows took flight in a perfect spiral, vanishing into storm clouds. Others began gathering strange items. Teeth from fish markets, splinters from gallows wood, ash from fire pits. Old offerings. Rituals not seen since the witch colonies. The circle was stirring. The new pact. Sarah met Jonathan again the next evening. This time in the catacombs beneath the city, where forgotten crypts held coffins marked with dates that no longer matched any calendar. There's a choice, she said. I can feel it coming. The 13th wants to bloom. It wants all of Charleston to vanish into legend. A city of ghosts no one remembers building. Jonathan touched the charm on his wrist. You're still human. You can choose differently. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Then why do I feel more alive when I'm close to it? Dash dash dash. Outside, the moon turned red. And across Charleston, the 13th door began to manifest. Not just in dreams, but in windows, in puddles, in the eyes of the dying. Every surface a potential gate. The 12 were waiting, and the city was slipping faster now. Dash dash dash. Final lines, the first collapse. At dawn, the oldest tree in Charleston split open with a sound like a scream. Inside the hollow trunk, a 13th heart, still beating. Blackstone was already there, whispering the hymn. Martha stood behind him, hands raised, eyes blind with light. They began the rite. The forgetter had been marked. Charleston would forget itself, unless Sarah changed the story. But could she? Dash dash dash. To be continued in Part 8, The Anchor's Choice. In Part 8, Sarah must decide whether to betray the 12 and help Jonathan reseal the 13th door, or let the city vanish into myth, becoming the new high seat of absence. Would you like Part 8 now? Part 8, The Anchor's Choice. 1,000 words. Dash dash dash. Charleston, South Carolina, May 1890. 2 hours before dawn, Sarah stood in the bell tower of the ruined church, barefoot, blood drying on her palms. Beneath her, the city whispered, not with voices, but with memory. Not memory as you or I know it. No, this was something alive. The kind of memory that doesn't just remember, it hungers, it weaves, it rewrites. And the weave was tightening. Every door below was becoming a mirror. Every mirror a gate, every gate a mouth, and every mouth whispered her name. Anchor, Sarah, unmake us. Dash dash dash. She had seen the end now. If she chose them, the 12, the door, the city would dissolve into a permanent echo. A myth. Charleston would not be destroyed, but something stranger, remembered by no one and yet felt by everyone. A blank page still warm from a vanished pen. If she chose him, the forgetter, Jonathan Bell, then there might still be a chance to pull the 13th back into the dark. But the cost? Herself. Dash dash dash. Below, in the catacombs. Jonathan knelt before the roots of the split tree, the place the heart had grown, beating black in its cradle of ashen bone. He laid out his tools. The needle of memory, the braid of first language, a mirror etched with 13 sigils, a coin taken from a corpse that had died unmourned. Each piece had power, but only in the presence of the anchor. He needed Sarah, but not as an assistant. As a sacrifice. He hated it, hated the order, hated the rituals passed down in whispers and pain. But this wasn't about tradition. It was about math. The 13th door was open. The 12 were willing, and only a 13th will could lock it again. And that will had to be freely given. Dash dash dash. Elsewhere in Charleston, the 12 were preparing the offering. Reverend Blackstone stood in the river now, robes soaked, speaking to something just below the surface. The shape that answered was not human, nor beast. It had once worn a child's voice, but now echoed like a cracked bell. Martha Liddell sat cross-legged inside a chalk circle made of salt and soot. Her eyes were gone, plucked from her skull in a ceremony no one taught her. She saw better without them now. The rest, the quiet mayor, the blind butcher, the weeping twins, were chanting in 12 different tongues. Each name fed the 13th. And one name hummed louder than the others. Sarah Beaumont. Dash dash dash. Bell Tower, just before dawn. Jonathan found her there. She didn't turn when he arrived. Just spoke softly. They want me to unname the city. To let it pass from the world of flesh into the world of suggestion. Charleston will become a memory no one ever had, but everyone feels. Jonathan said nothing. I could do it, she said. It would be beautiful. It would be lost, he replied. And you with it. I'm already lost. He stepped beside her. The city looked bruised, sky bleeding at the edges. Bells rang in reverse. You still have a choice, he said. I don't know if it's mine anymore. He held out the coin. One act of forgetting, freely chosen. You place this on your tongue, speak your true name, and will the memory of the door to pass into me. I'll carry it. You'll forget it ever happened. But I am the memory, she said. He hesitated. Then we lose you. Her voice trembled. What happens if I don't choose? The door will. And it won't choose you. It'll choose another child, another orphan, again, and again, until it finds someone who opens it wider. Silence. Wind howled. She took the coin. Dash dash dash. Back in the catacombs, Sarah lay on the stone slab, the braid wrapped around her wrist. Jonathan stood above her, candlelight flickering across his eyes. The rite began. He whispered the language of before. She echoed the syllables. Some came too easily, others sliced her throat like razors as they emerged. When she reached the 13th phrase, her voice cracked. Her skin blistered where the braid touched her. Blood dripped from her ears. Her eyes. Then came the final moment. Jonathan held the needle. Silver, impossibly thin. It needed to pierce her spine, not to kill her, but to sever the tether between her memory and the door. "Do you consent?" he asked. Her lips trembled. Yes. The needle went in, and the world screamed. Dash dash dash. At that exact second, the 12 reacted. Reverend Blackstone staggered, mid-sermon, coughing up feathers. Martha Liddell's circle shattered, salt turning to bone. The river boiled. Mirrors across Charleston exploded. The 13th door howled. It was being forgotten. It raged, but not in sound. It raged in silence. Dash dash dash. Sarah's mind, the interior collapse. She was floating in a white space. 13 doors before her. 12 had names. The last was unlabeled. A swirling black surface. It pulsed. A voice spoke. "Do not close me. I gave you purpose." She shook her head. "You gave me loneliness. You made me a memory instead of a girl." It hissed. "Close me and you lose all of it. The power, the knowing, the truth." Her hand reached out. It trembled. Then, click. Dash dash dash. In the waking world, Sarah gasped. The braid burned to ash. The sigils vanished. The mirror shattered inward. Jonathan slumped. She was breathing. She was whole, but her eyes had changed. Not empty, not bright, just human. She blinked slowly. "What was I saying?" Jonathan smiled, exhausted. "You were telling me about your favorite color." She frowned. "Blue, I think." He nodded. "Mine too." She stood, wobbling. "Why are we in a church basement?" Jonathan held her arm gently. "Storms passed. Let's go see the sunrise." Dash dash dash. Charleston, dawn. The city held. No collapse. No spiral. No vanishing. People woke with headaches they couldn't explain. A church burned the night before, but no one remembered when. The baker on Market Street looked strangely familiar to some, but his name escaped everyone. A cat walked across the cobblestones and paused, its eyes shining gold for a moment, then blinked and became ordinary. And the 13th door, gone, or sleeping. Dash dash dash. Final scene, 2 days later. Jonathan packed his satchel. The tools went away, the needle wrapped in cloth. The coin placed back in the lockbox. He left Sarah a note. Greater than, "You saved them. But more importantly, you saved yourself. I've recorded the memory where it won't be found. If the door opens again, I'll remember so you won't have to. JB." Sarah found the letter on her windowsill. She read it twice. She didn't remember Jonathan, but the paper smelled of salt and ash. And something in her heart said thank you. Part 9, The Ink in the Walls. Baltimore, 1903. 13 years later. The house on Wiltshire Street was wrong. It didn't creak. It breathed. Hattie Doyle felt it the moment she crossed the threshold. She had inherited the row house from an aunt she never met, Sarah Beaumont, a name only whispered in her family, like a warning. The lawyer had called it a miraculous windfall. But as Hattie stepped over the worn threshold, she felt something tug at her ribs, like an invisible hand pressing inward. And something in the walls said her name. Not out loud, not yet, but it would. Dash dash dash. The letter. She found the letter tucked behind a floorboard beneath the stairwell. Yellowed with time, unsealed, no envelope. Greater than to the one who comes after me. There are still doors. I held one. I walked with it. I sang to it in my sleep. But I'm growing tired. If it speaks to you, don't listen. If it knocks, don't answer. Burn this house. Burn me with it, or suffer. It wasn't signed, but Hattie knew it was from Sarah. She had her eyes, and lately, she'd been dreaming in languages no one spoke anymore. Dash dash dash. The child in the wallpaper. On the second night, the wallpaper changed. She noticed it while brushing her teeth. The floral print in the hallway had always been a dull green. Faded, curling at the corners. But now it showed faces. Tiny ones, like children peeking through leaves. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and they moved, smiled. One of them reached a hand to its lips in a gesture of silence. That night, Hattie dreamt of water pooling on the ceiling. The sound of church bells being rung underwater. A door made of mirrors. And behind it, a girl. Not a child, not old, something in between, whispering, "Greater than, she left me here." You'll open it. I know you will. Dash dash dash. The attic diary. Hattie found the attic door on the 4th day. Behind it, dust, feathers, a broken rocking horse, and a diary wrapped in oilskin. Sarah's handwriting filled every page. Precise, obsessive, unhinged, greater than I thought leaving Charleston would help. I thought burying the name would kill its memory. But it grew roots. There are other doors. They want to open through people now. Not places. A child was born last winter in Boston. She already knew the sigils. Something is spreading, and I'm part of it. The final page simply read. It's in the ink. It hides in language. It waits to be read. Hattie dropped the book. She had read too much already. Dash dash dash. The wall opens. On the 6th night, the wall in the parlor split open. Not violently. It sighed. A vertical seam spread across the far wall, wallpaper peeling like old bark. From inside came a flickering blue light and the smell of wet stone. And a voice, achingly familiar. Greater than, you don't have to be alone, Hattie. She stepped back. Her foot hit the phonograph. It turned on by itself. A soft gospel hymn spilled out. Then reversed. Then the melody warped into something not meant for ears. She screamed and kicked the player off its table. The voice inside the wall laughed. Not cruelly, sadly. Greater than, Sarah tried to hold it. But she was too kind. You could do better. Dash dash dash. The visitor. The next morning, Hattie found a woman sitting at her kitchen table. Black coat, black veil, hands folded, not a speck of dust on her boots despite the rain. Who are you? Hattie demanded. The woman smiled. I'm the archivist. What archive? The one that collects people like you. The ones the doors watch. She pulled a silver pocket watch from her coat and placed it on the table. It ticked once, then stopped. When it ticks again, you'll have a choice, she said. What choice? To keep carrying Sarah's burden, or give it back? Hattie frowned. Give it back to who? The woman didn't answer, just stood and walked through the back door, without opening it. Dash dash dash. The blood message. That night, thunder rattled the windows. Hattie couldn't sleep. She sat in the hallway staring at the child in the wallpaper. It stared back. Then its mouth opened. Blood began to seep from the floorboards beneath her feet. It crawled toward her. A single word written in it. Listen. Hattie screamed and ran to the attic. But the diary was gone. In its place, a silver locket. She opened it. Inside was a photo of Sarah, her eyes scratched out. And beneath it, scratched into the metal. Greater than door 9 is open. Door 10 is hungry. You are door 11. Dash dash dash. The choice. It was just after 3 a.m. when the watch ticked again. One soft click, then silence. She stood before the parlor wall, now fully open. Inside was not a room, not a corridor, but a memory, her own. She saw her mother, dead from fever when Hattie was only 5. She saw herself curled in a corner, humming nonsense words that were really names. The same names from Sarah's diary. She was already chosen. This had never been a coincidence. Tears in her eyes, Hattie whispered. Greater than, if I take this, what happens to the others? The door replied. Greater than, they are already dreaming. Dash dash dash. The acceptance. Hattie stepped into the wall. The house folded in on itself behind her. No one saw her again. But a letter arrived at the office of a Baltimore archivist 3 days later. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded page with a blood-red seal. Greater than underscore, to the one who watches. I have taken the door into me. It's heavier than I imagined. But I understand now why Sarah smiled at the end. There is something holy in carrying what others cannot. I will keep it closed. For as long as I can. Underscore. HD. Dash dash dash. Closing line. And somewhere, beneath cobblestone and shadow, door 12 stirred. It was almost time. Part 10. The Last Door. Salem, Massachusetts, present day. The house had no address. It was not listed on any map. And yet, the woman who found it, Drive, Lenora Gray, professor of linguistics and folklore, felt as if she'd been walking toward it her entire life. She stood in front of the rotting structure, notebook in hand, the symbol etched into its threshold burning into her mind, a perfect circle with 11 intersecting lines. Door 11 had opened decades ago. Lenora had come to find door 12. And she was the last one left to do it. Dash dash dash. The waking ink. Her obsession began with a single phrase in an untranslated manuscript from 1702, found in the Harvard Library's restricted section. Greater than, the 12th shall be no door at all, but the mouth of time. The phrase repeated itself across unrelated texts, biblical apocrypha, West African griot chants, and the encoded poetry of the asylum-bound French mystic Margot Duplessis. Different cultures, different continents, but always the same warning. The final door doesn't open outward. It opens inward. Lenora began to hear voices when she slept. Not speaking, but scratching. Like ink crawling across paper in her dreams. She no longer dreamed of places. She dreamed of grammar. The door speaks. Inside the Salem house, every wall was covered in painted script. Not English, not Latin, but shapes, glyphs that pulsed softly as she passed. The wallpaper undulated as if breathing beneath her fingertips. In the parlor sat a dusty phonograph, identical to the one described in the old Baltimore case files, Sarah Beaumont's case. Hattie Doyle's, too. The needle rose and set itself. A voice played, not a recording, a memory. Greater than, I have held it for 27 years. But the ink is waking. The door does not sleep. It remembers all we have forgotten. Lenora whispered to herself, Hattie. The voice in the machine paused, then replied directly. Greater than, you're not late, Professor. You're right on time. The archivist returns. A wind split the silence behind her. There she stood again, the woman in black. The same figure from the Doyle and Beaumont files. Unaged, unchanging. The archivist. She placed a pocket watch on the mantel. It did not tick. It hummed. Have you come to open it? The woman asked. Lenora nodded. I believe I must. You'll end it. I'll understand it, Lenora corrected. The archivist tilted her head, as if slightly amused. No one understands door 12. They only become it. The mirror room. Beneath the Salem house was a spiral staircase of rusted iron. Lenora descended without light, though her path glowed faintly, words from forgotten alphabets lighting each step as she passed. At the bottom, a circular chamber made of black mirrors. 12, arranged like a clock. Each mirror showed a different scene. Door 1, a cave painting with blood-red symbols. Door 5, a train full of sleeping children. Door 8, a woman screaming backward. Door 11, Hattie Doyle walking into ink. Only door 12 remained blank. Until Lenora approached. Then it filled, with her face. Not reflected, replicated. In the mirror, her double whispered. Greater than, you were the ink all along. The shattering. The mirrors began to crack. Not randomly. Each fracture formed letters. The letters formed words. The words bled from the glass, floating midair. Greater than, door 12 is the tongue. Door 12 is the writer. You are the script. Lenora dropped her notebook. The floor pulsed beneath her like a heart. Then the humming watch above snapped open. A single word inside. Unread. The mirrors shattered completely. And the chamber spoke. The truth. Lenora didn't fall. She was unwritten. She dissolved into syllables, drifting upward into a dark sky she could no longer name. And in that timeless void, she finally saw. The doors were never built. They were told. Stories shaped them. Belief fed them. And the final one, door 12, was not a place. It was language itself. Every unspeakable thought. Every forbidden book. Every word that reached too far. The mouth of time wasn't something she stepped through. It was something she'd always been part of. And now she had joined it. The final archive. 3 days later, the Salem house vanished. In its place, an empty lot with a for sale sign. No records, no deed, but inside a manila envelope slid beneath the door of the Library of Congress, someone found a letter. Unsigned, unaddressed, but it read, greater than, language is alive. It remembers who wrote it. The doors were not gateways. They were warnings. There is no door 13. There is only silence. LG. And somewhere, in a book no one remembers writing, a blank page turned itself. Ready for the next name. Epilogue. The door within. If you read this far, if you felt something watching behind your eyes, then you've already touched the ink. Don't say it aloud. Don't write it again. Let the silence hold you. Because the more you speak of them, the more you help them open.